Calling this 100 calorie surplus versus a 334 calorie surplus also just shows you didn't read the paper. All right. It's time we finally address Lyle McDonald and his claims about a surplus being necessary to maximize growth. So to make this video easy and structured and not all over the place, I'm going to organize this into a few different categories, and hopefully YouTube timestamps it a little effectively better than I will. Firstly, we are going to establish claims on both sides. Then we're going to go through Lyle's evidence. Then we're going to go through our evidence. Then we're going to address the limitations of the overall evidence. And then we'll discuss theoretical fun stuff, because why not? So I guess to get things started, why don't you, since I don't think you've made a YouTube video on this, or a video besides one. You made a YouTube video already?
On bulking, yeah.
Oh, I meant recently. So I don't think you've, yeah.
I disappeared off the internet. I've just been focusing on life.
So I guess clarify as clear and concise as you possibly can your stance about what Maingaining is and what your practical recommendations are, and then we'll talk about Lyle's recommendations as well, because he's also made those pretty clear.
Okay, so first I would say that maintenance is not necessarily maintaining body weight overall, because you can gain muscle in both a deficit and in a surplus. Whereas you can only really gain fat in a surplus, because fat is your energy storage tissue. So I would define maintenance as maintaining your energy storage tissue, because you're not eating so many calories that your body is storing extra energy, hence a surplus of energy. So that's how I would define it. And I don't define it as just blanketly stating like maintaining body weight, because I don't think that that provides a full explanation of what is going on in the body.
Okay. So to further ask questions, just to make sure they understand as best as possible, when you refer to body fat, are you referring to body fat mass or body fat percentage?
Body fat percentage.
Body fat percentage. And I think that's also something I want to make as clear as humanly possible. I do think that hasn't been as effectively communicated by everybody. We are referring to composition, right? So body fat mass, if we gain mass upward, then technically we got leaner, right? Because body fat percentage is based on our overall composition, how much fat mass we have versus how much lean mass we have, and then taking a percentage of that. So if you have 20 pounds of fat on top of 150 pounds, I'm not doing the math off the top of my head really quickly, that's the percentage you are at. If you gain an extra 10 pounds of muscle and you still only have 20 pounds of fat, this is the new body fat percentage you're at. You got leaner, right? That's how that works. So obviously, you have to gain some fat mass. It's just we're trying to minimize the amount of fat mass we gain, because it's unnecessary to gain an abundance of body fat for an extra like 2-3 pounds of muscle a year if you're an advanced lifter. So does that clarify everything? Do you feel like I represented?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so. I would also add that when you do gain muscle mass and you're using your existing body fat stores, you are effectively putting yourself in, as you go further and further, you're effectively putting yourself into a deficit, even if your body weight is increasing overall, because your body is using the fat stores on your body, which we already understand that if you're using the fat stores on your body because you're not consuming enough calories, then that is considered a deficit. Even if you're gaining body weight, if that body weight is muscle and that muscle is using the fat and your fat stores are going down, you are effectively putting yourself in a deficit.
Right, so just looking at body weight as a metric alone isn't the best approach. There's a little bit more to it, more nuance to it, that I think is helpful when trying to assess your goals if you're trying to grow and maximize growth. But again, we're also going to get into the theoreticals at the end, like I said, because there's another line of conversation I want to have with you a little bit, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to decide what you think. But let's get into Lyle's specific claims. Lyle claims that you need a 200 to 300 calorie surplus to maximize growth.
So the proper conclusion is not that maintenance is all you need. It should be that 500 calories is too much. So what I would conclude would be maybe a value in between that is ideal. Maybe, let's split the middle. Let's call it 250 with a little variance. Let's say 200 to 300 calories is probably about optimal to maximize muscle gains in a majority of people.
We're gonna actually go into the evidence, because His recommendations here, I'll even put up a screenshot of his actual recommendations. So his practical recommendations is based on the years of proper training, which a little bit arbitrary because how do you define years of proper training? You have to kind of know what you're talking about, right? So first year of training, 1.5 to 2 pounds monthly gain, 20 to 25 pounds a year. Second year of training, 1 pound monthly gain, 10 to 12 pounds yearly gain. 3 years, 0.5 pounds a month, 5 to 6 pounds a year. 4 years of training, irrelevant how much you gain per month, 2 to 3 pounds a year. So that is his claims, right? Which, if you notice right off the bat, how are you going to be in a 250 calorie surplus and only gain 2 to 3 pounds a year? I mean, maybe he's saying muscle only? Which, how do you even define only muscle?
Well, I'm just confused because the rate of muscle gain is also partially genetically predisposed. So, like, a lot of this is going to depend on person to person. Like, if you're not hitting 1.5 to 2 pounds of muscle per year, and you're like a beginner, like
per month, you mean?
Or per month? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
1.5 to 2 pounds of muscle. Sorry, my glasses. I still suck at seeing. If you're getting 20 to 25 pounds of muscle per year with 1 year of proper training, and you're a beginner, and you're not hitting that, you really shouldn't be like disappointed in yourself, because 20 to 25 pounds of muscle, if you're already pretty developed, because let's say you had an active childhood, that's like very unrealistic.
Yeah, but also, again, to add to the point, like, if he's talking about gaining weight, which I assume he is, like, that's, you have to account for some of that being fat, right? So, like, I'm gonna hope he's saying overall weight gain, because then that would make more sense.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this makes no sense to me.
But still, nonetheless, those are his general recommendations. And once again, 250 calorie surplus already exceeds the yearly gain recommendation. So why wouldn't maybe he thinks advanced people can't even maximize growth, which makes no sense, because maximizing growth is context dependent on how much muscle gain you have, the potential that you have. So I don't really understand his line.
The actual values themselves don't really hold meaning when you consider genetics and what your past has been like.
Yeah.
So someone like me who is like doing Taekwondo, I already had some leg muscle, and so I couldn't gain that much more muscle onto my legs when I started training. And so, like, you wouldn't expect me to put on like tens of pounds of muscle even as a beginner, because I already had that development.
Yeah, so again, maybe he's basing his numbers off of his personal experiences, which again, like, it's a little arbitrary, but again, like, that point is, I just wanted to show that because it already contradicts his claims. But let's get into the fun part, shall we? 12 papers. I'll actually 13, because there was a recent one that he went over in his most recent YouTube video, but 12 original papers, 1 extra one for funsies. We are going to cover Lyle's evidence now, starting with Bartels et al. 1989. This one was actually kind of hard to find because I think the only reference to it was a part of another paper, which again, I will show these screenshots on here and kind of look at them here. That way I can reference it. But in this little trial, they essentially gave them an extra 500 calories on top of what they were currently eating. One being a high carb and the other one being a medium carb. And notice at this little section down here towards the bottom, increase in lean body mass per week, right? After that part, no corresponding increase in fat mass. So he's trying to say that this is a surplus, right? Because like that's his major claim here. How is it a surplus if they gained no fat? Already off to a great start with his evidence.
Just to remind everyone, your fat storage, like your body fat, that is your extra energy storage. If you're not consuming extra energy, then your body isn't going to store it in your fat.
Yeah. Like and mind you, I'm saying this again, you'll probably hear me say it a few more times. You are probably always in a deficit or a surplus. There is very rarely a time where you are actually at exact perfect TDE maintenance. You would have to know the exact amount of calories your body is burning. You'd have to know exactly how many calories you're consuming. And the FDA already has a margin of error with the food labels that we have. So there's no actual way of knowing exactly how much food you're consuming. You can only really go off of like trends on the scale and also body composition looking in the mirror. So keep that in mind. Next one, Creeder et al. 1996. This one essentially looked at a giant overfeeding One group getting a maltodextrin, 760 plus calories on top of what they were currently eating. Another group getting 570 calories of phosphagain, basically supplements meant to help, gain mass. And what they found was, well, they gained pretty similar muscle and one group gained more fat, right? So, or I guess two groups gained more fat. But the point is, right, again, this paper is looking at a giant overfeeding versus another giant or semi-less giant overfeeding, and then a slightly less giant overfeeding. Once again, demonstrating that a larger caloric surplus, you're going to gain similar muscle, and then you're going to gain tons more fat, depending on how much more over your maintenance you're at. So again, not addressing, the claims of Maingaining. It's still just showing the same thing that's been repeated over and over. More calories over your maintenance just leads to more body fat accumulation.
And just to clarify, we are not saying that you can't maximize muscle growth in a surplus.
Yep.
You can maximize muscle growth in a surplus. We're just saying that you don't need to gain all the fat alongside with it.
Which is ironic, because we agree with Lyle. Like, Lyle literally says this himself, but then he says that you need a 200, 300 calorie surplus.
Which there's not really, based off of this evidence, you're gaining the same amount of muscle, but you're just gaining more fat on one end of the spectrum.
Yeah, so
it's not like, there's not really evidence to suggest that this extra calorie consumption is actually going towards specifically muscle. If anything, it's saying it's going specifically towards fat, which, as I said, physiologically, extra energy storage. If you eat too much, your body's going to dump it into fat, not into muscle.
Yeah, like, wouldn't you rather have a rate of gain of 0.5 pound of fat a month instead of 1 pound, right? Like, just like, that's the idea is, right, minimize the giant surplus. There's no need to go up to a 300 calorie surplus unless your rate of gain is that large, which I doubt your rate of gain is so significant that you would need that rate of gain to be able to maintain your relative composition. That would still put you into a higher body fat range, which again, it's not the end of the world if you don't gain too much fat. But if you're like an advanced lifter gaining 4 pounds a year and you're gaining over 12 pounds of fat on top of that 4 pounds of muscle, like that's crazy. Like, why would you do that? We just want to clarify that. We're going to continue to go through these. You're going to see a trend of, once again, it just showing the same thing over and over. A larger calorie surplus just leads to more fat gain. Smaller calorie surplus leads to less fat gain, similar muscle. Next paper, Rosnick et al. 2002, which there's also another thing that I was going to say while I'm trying to find this paper. A lot of these papers are, like, honestly worse quality than the Helms paper that he loves to shit on, which I find ironic.
A lot of these papers don't really track the diet as strictly, which makes sense because the Rosnick paper is not even on, like, a surplus versus a non-surplus or a surplus versus a greater surplus. It's on supplements.
Yep, it's on the effects of high-calorie supplements on body composition and muscular strength following resistance training. So they're eating 2,000 calories over, like, whatever they were normally having, carbs and protein for one group, and then 2,000 calories more of carbs. So it just compares overfeeding, or I don't know how much of an overfeeding it was, but an overfeeding that led to composition. But again, point is, it doesn't look at what we're trying to address. Once again.
And I was using the air quotations because one of the groups that was supposedly in a surplus actually lost body fat to a non-significant extent, which would either suggest maintenance or in a deficit. So
it's still, once again, as I was just saying, it doesn't address the claims. Now we'll go move on to Nagasawa 2013.
Did you end up finding it?
I don't know if I actually found Nagasawa. This is the one paper I think I didn't find. But based on his general notes, it just looks at 1,000 calories on top of somebody's maintenance, which again, I don't know what that shows.
The two things that I think that could have happened here was either that it was in a different language and he was able to actually get it from the author in English, or this was AI hallucinated.
Well, no, because it was referenced in Taguchi, so I know it's a paper that exists. I just can't find it.
Well, I'm saying the data of like 1,000 calorie surplus, like that either is from the author themselves and he got it sent to them, but I can't verify that.
Yeah,
so.
I can't verify it either, so I have no idea where it is. If he posts about it, then we can talk about it. But we'll move on to the actual paper that does reference Nagasawa, which maybe that's where he got the data from, I don't know, which is Taguchi et al. 2020, which looked at basically meal frequency. But they ended up eating, both groups ended up eating like 5,000 calories. So it was just comparing, like, splitting up 5,000 calories 3 times or 5 times. So how is that relevant to the conversation?
Yeah.
Once again, like, you're just showing the same thing over and over, which everybody agrees on. Nobody in their nobody I know is disagreeing with this concept of more calories equals more fat, not necessarily more gain. Okay, I think all of us can agree on that. Next paper, we have Spillane et al. 2016. And next up, looking at Spillane, which we're just going to continue to kind of run through these faster. That way we can kind of get to the point, because it's repetitive at this point. We're just saying the same thing over and over. But Spillane, we look at one group getting a bit more high carb overfeeding, quote unquote, 1,248 calories over, and then the other one getting a higher protein one. But one group is only getting 1 gram per kilogram of protein per pound of body weight, and the other one's getting 2.4 grams per kilogram per pound of body weight, which
is modifying the macronutrients.
Yeah, they're modifying macronutrients, but like already right off the bat, like, you're not maximizing growth, only eating 1 gram per kilogram. So that's already a limitation of that paper. But again, it doesn't matter because it's not looking at what we care about, right? It's still not addressing the points. And that's a continuous trend you'll notice with, again, more of the papers that come. Which we'll go to Garth et al. Now, which is actually a pretty popular one that I think he glazed like crazy. So in this paper, he essentially claims that one group is at maintenance and the other one is in a 500 calorie surplus. And he shows this pretty little graph, which I will throw up on the screen. One of the groups essentially is gaining a lot of fat, and the other one is gaining a little bit of fat. But still, notice, the fat gain in both groups exceeds the amount of lean body mass that both groups make. So one group is in a probably 200, 300 calorie surplus, and the other one's in a 500 calorie surplus. So once again, it's still the same thing over and over. It's not maintenance like he claims it is.
Contrary to what he seems to believe, I actually prefer citing this study to support the Maingaining argument, because it demonstrates that when you're just in a really great calorie surplus, you're gaining a lot of fat. And the authors even say themselves that the 500 calorie surplus didn't seem to confer to more fat-free mass or muscle gain. And in this study specifically, 1% increase in lean mass gains in the higher surplus group was entirely attributable to 3 outliers. It was a 1% non-significant difference, which is already abysmal. But being that that 1% difference is almost entirely attributable to literally just 3 outliers, that's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
Next paper is Campbell et al. 2018, which I think this is a kind of a poor paper to include, because once again, you are looking at one group eating not enough protein and comparing it to a group that's in a, mind you, the first group in a deficit, 300 calorie deficit, which we already know, a 300 calorie deficit, we see a decrease in muscle protein synthesis by about 18%. And then you give them not enough protein on top of that. So they're already in a state where muscle protein turnover and metabolism is at an elevated pace because you're in a deficit. And then you're comparing it to a surplus where they're actually getting enough protein. You're comparing that and saying, oh yes, this is more evidence for surplus. That's a confounding variable looking at it from like just the protein alone. So I don't think that's a paper I would really like include in the conversation, because I don't think anybody's really arguing like with much evidence, to be completely honest, that you could maximize growth in a 300 calorie deficit under eating protein. Like that's already stupid. Nobody's saying that. So I'm not the biggest fan of that paper, to be completely honest. Anything to add to that?
No, you covered it pretty succinctly.
Okay, so next one is Ribeiro et al. This one is
oh my god.
Yeah, this is a pilot. If I'm not mistaken, this is the pilot trial, right? Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't it the one with the race-based calculations? Pretty sure
it was actually, yeah, it's the one that used prediction equation validated by Gabo et al. 2013. Graded camera quality because my phone decided to run out of storage. But continuing onward with your breakdown.
So remember when I called Dr. Mike Israetel out on race realism because race is not a biological construct? Yeah, this Ribeiro paper uses an equation to calculate muscle mass based off of race.
Yeah, which already, like, using an equation to predict muscle is already stupid. But on top of that, they also use a skin fold measurement for body fat, which, mind you, Lyle was super against. with the Helms paper, he's over here including papers using calculations and like skinfold to justify a surplus. It's just a bad study. It's a very poorly constructed study.
And just to add on, this was technically a pilot trial, so
Yeah.
it has even less participants than Helms.
Yeah. So poopy. And then Smith et al. This is one that actually is pretty well designed. I think Ella, you wanted to take a little bit of control over here.
I
to
was
talk about
really
this.
surprised that he was citing Garth over Smith because, in my personal opinion, and even when I spoke to other people who are in the field, they actually like the Smith study to support the bulking argument better than all the other articles that he cited. And so the Smith paper basically correlates lean mass with body weight, and they use the 4C body composition model. Yes, that is more accurate than just using a DEXA alone or BIA alone. And they also do use an ultrasound, I'm pretty sure. And so, like, it's not bad methodologically. That being said, their 0.55% lean mass acquisition correlated with approximately 100% lean mass gains based off of their correlative model. And the problem with this is that correlative model had less than 50% predictive power, which is atrocious. That basically means that there's 1,000,001 other reasons why these people were gaining muscle, which makes sense. They're lifting.
Again, what is truly the difference between a 50 calorie surplus and a 250 calorie surplus? It's the fat gain. It is the fat gain every single time. It is not the muscle, it's the fat gain. So I'd rather gain significantly less body fat over a year. I'd rather gain 6 pounds of fat a year as opposed to 12 pounds. Wouldn't anyone, like, would you rather gain like 12 pounds of fat on top of 3 pounds of muscle, or 6 pounds of fat on top of 3 pounds of muscle?
If you're consistently getting stronger, there's not a really big reason to hyperfixate on the scale like Lyle seems to think that you need to.
Yeah, if you're advanced, as he says, there's barely any muscle gain that you're probably going to even have. So it's better to just look at your overall composition and pay attention to your lifting. Because if strength is going up, generally speaking, if you're following a basic hypertrophy program, that correlates to muscle size increase because more contractile proteins equals to more force production. It's basic, okay? But moving on to the next paper, because we don't want to stay to one paper too long, we have Antonio et al. And I don't know the year of this. It's I don't even know, 2015. Okay, so this paper looks at 100 calorie surplus with a I think this might be not one of those papers that actually looks at a surplus. It looks at a 100 calorie surplus eating 2.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and then 334 calorie surplus with I don't know why he says 3.1 grams because it says 3.4 here. Also worth mentioning, I'm pretty sure this paper uses a bod pod, and the results, yeah, it sucks.
Error bars are atrocious.
Yeah, so ginormous error bars. So this is funny. The high protein group.
Their mean didn't even increase.
I know. That's what I was trying to show. So let me go over to the actual metrics. I don't know why it's not showing me the other metrics. So lean body mass was pretty much roughly the same. Fat mass, one group, the high protein group, actually lost fat. So it was actually in a caloric deficit. And it also had similar lean body mass to the group that lost, I think, 0.3. So that one just shows that, like, if you're eating more protein, you can preserve more muscle and potentially gain more, what's it called? You can gain similar amount of muscle. So it's a deficit.
I would actually say that instead of just demonstrating a deficit, I would actually argue that this just demonstrates that protein has a high thermic effect. And if you just eat a crap load of protein, then your body's going to
that's what I mean.
more energy.
It literally just shows body fat percentage decreases by 2.4% in the high protein group.
Yeah.
And and then 0.6 or negative 0.6 in the lower protein group. But again, that's still looking at a caloric, like, overall net expenditure is a caloric deficit. So it just shows that if you're just smarter with your protein intake when you're going into a diet, you can preserve more muscle and lose more fat.
All I'm gonna say is if Lyle took my ANOVA and regression analysis class, he would probably fail the portion when we were learning about confounding, because a lot of these studies have confounding variables, at least for the question that he's trying to ask. And that really muddies the water on what conclusions you can actually draw from this data.
Well, I also just want to point out that calling this 100 calorie surplus versus a 334 calorie surplus also just shows you didn't read the paper. Like, how can you call something a surplus and then they lose fat? That makes no sense. It's just, again, it seems like cherry picking confirmation bias over and over and over and over with every paper that we look at. And speaking of, we're going to go over to the next paper, which is Sanchez et al. Hold on, I'm going to have to find this paper. All right, it took me a second to find the paper. So this one is looking at basically two groups. One group getting a 500 calorie peanut-based snack, and then one other group getting a 500 calorie snack of carbs. So once again, it's just looking at different macronutrient distribution to see how it has an effect on composition. So it's still not really looking at what we care about. And the results, if I'm not mistaken, basically same lean body mass, one group gained a bit more fat mass. So
It's the same thing that we're saying on repeat.
Yep. So once again, doesn't look at what we're talking about. And the last paper, Helms et al. We all know about this paper. We all know what it shows. Okay, but I'll throw up the freaking screenshots. Everybody has talked about this paper like multiple times.
It shows that body fat stayed the same in the maintenance group, if not was a little bit down in 3 of the participants. It showed that fat mass was increased in the slight surplus and high surplus group. It showed that there was no significant differences in muscle thickness size.
I think for one thing was like biceps. Was there one thing that the biceps?
No, there were something. So the rectus femoris, I think, and the vastus lateralis, the maintenance group outperformed some of the surplus groups, whereas in other ones like the biceps, the surplus group outperformed the maintenance group. However, if you actually understand statistics, these non-significant increases are not meaningful. You can't control where muscle grows. And so in some people, their legs are going to grow more. In other people, their arms are going to grow more. Does that mean that a surplus is disproportionately causing your biceps to grow more? Which ways? Like, even when you're looking at the error bars on specifically the biceps one, you see that pretty much all of the participants in one of the group were hovering around the mean, whereas there was one outlier. And then in another group, they were scattered all over the place, like somebody just threw a bag of marbles onto the floor. And so, like, when you're looking at these things, you have to remember that there's biological variations, and if there's not a significant difference, that does say something, especially when you're looking at multiple muscle groups and some groups are outperforming others in one and others are underperforming in another muscle group. That doesn't tell you anything about what the surplus is doing. That just tells you that there's biological variation between people.
So, in the end, those are the major papers that he uses. There was one other paper that was included.
The newer
Do you
one.
want to include that as well? Go over that, or would you rather go over
Yeah, let's
our
go over
evidence?
it.
Okay, throw it up. All right, found it. It took a second. But
Gavanda, not
yes,
Smith.
Gavanda, not Smith. I don't know why I said Smith. But Gavanda et al. Is from, it's very recent actually. I think it's 2026. If I'm not mistaken, based on Lyle's synopsis, he said this paper was looking at a 300 calorie surplus versus a 500 calorie surplus. So already right off the bat, like that's same thing that we've been saying for the past, I think, 30 minutes now, but there was something else that you wanted to bring up as
I
well.
also just wanted to say, like, when he's saying 300 to 500 calorie surplus, like, keep in mind that these guys are not in, like, a metabolic ward. They're not, like, being, strictly adhering to this nutrition protocol. Some people are probably eating a little bit over, a little bit under. And so when he's, like, giving out these arbitrary numbers, he's going by the word of what the authors are saying that they advise these people to do.
Not their rate of gain. Like,
Yeah,
and
not
that's
their rate of
and
gain.
that's what I wanted to highlight over and over, is that there's multiple papers that are included in his little videos and his evidence that say it's a 500 calorie surplus, say it's a 200 calorie surplus,
He's
say
just
all this,
trusting it
but
because
he's
saying
literally
it.
just like looking for like keywords that show what he wants to see, and then he ignores the evidence. Because how can you say, like, for example, that one paper was 100 calorie surplus versus a 300 calorie surplus, quote unquote, how can you say it's a surplus when both groups lost fat? Like,
Also, I did, I basically took the fold change, so I did control over experimental, and then I took the, I transformed that value using the log base 2 method, just to, like, give a better understanding of the differences in fat gain versus lean mass gain. After running that through the log 2 base transformation, just to make it a little bit more symmetrical in the up and downs that were occurring, there was a 1-fold increase in fat mass and a 7% increase in lean mass when you're comparing the quote-unquote higher surplus to the lower surplus group. And so again, you're seeing non-significant differences in lean mass, and you're seeing drastic differences in fat mass, which again, fat is your energy storage tissue. If you're eating too many calories for your body to use, your body is not dumping it into your skeletal muscle, it's dumping it into fat.
Yep. So in the end, I kind of want to just clarify everything, try to make sure that we understand our evidence as well. Because all these papers can also be used as evidence for our claims, which once again, it just shows that the more calories you go up, it doesn't lead to anything more in terms of muscle gain. It leads to just more fat gain. So you can take the same logic that he takes from his little like videos and papers, and you can just apply it in our way, where it's like, all right, if a 250 calorie surplus leads to about a pound of fat a month, then why not drop it down to another 100, maybe 100 calorie surplus or a 50 calorie surplus, and minimize that fat gain even more, right? Because if we're trying to maximize growth, we don't need a bunch of excess body fat. So a lot of these papers just show that exact idea in theory. They just show it with different, well, supposed caloric surpluses, some of them not even looking at caloric surpluses, and some of them being in a deficit. But nonetheless, it's still showing what we're talking about. It's just the more calories, the more fat. It's just simple as that.
I'd also say that there's individualistic like variation between person to person. Me and Jackson, we both have really high appetites. So we actually take an even more holistic approach to this, where we say, okay, rather than just throwing on an extra 50 or an extra 100 calories, we say, all right, let's just eat around our maintenance. Some days we're gonna go over, some days we're gonna go under. But if we're gaining strength consistently, if our physiques look like they're putting on muscle and we're looking a little bit leaner, okay, maybe we throw in a little extra calories here and there. But we adjust things based off of hunger levels, based off of our physique, based off our strength, rather than just looking at the scale arbitrarily.
Yep, because I mean, like, this whole concept of like looking at the scale only is the reason a bunch of people tried to bulk up to 200 pounds and got fat.
Exactly.
And then everyone's complaining like, oh, it's so hard to diet. Like Mike Israel. But like, point is, like, all these people obsessed with the numbers on the scale are just forgetting the fact that muscle gain itself happens grams at a time. So what you're looking for is a very slow process. And it's not something that you're always going to be able to track perfectly, no matter what paper you cite. It's not going to give you exact numbers on how much muscle you can gain. So this whole idea that you need to see these relative changes on the scale is based off of anecdote and poorly constructed studies that don't even show what is being claimed. Which, like, again, 100 calorie surplus being a deficit, 500 calorie surplus actually not being a 500 calories. Like, point is, a lot of the data just has a ton of limitations, not showing what they're even trying to assess, right? Because people are not following their diets perfectly, because it's not like they can force these participants to eat exactly what they're...
They could, but they're spend the extra money for it.
But yeah, so that's the point. Like, they didn't do that. And then secondly, we have DEXA scans, bod pods.
And that's the other part, is a lot of these methods. So remember when I was talking about between individual variability in muscle gain, how some people are going to gain more muscle in their biceps, some people are going to gain more muscle in their quads, some people are just going to overall gain more muscle than others, not necessarily because they're training harder or they're training better, but because they have different genetics, they have different numbers of muscle fibers at birth.
Yep.
And so as a result, they're just going to have differences between individuals. Now let's inflate those differences by throwing in the variability that is contributed by water retention, because you're eating more calories.
Yep.
DEXA, BIA, bod pod, they're all modified, or they can all be affected by the amount of water you're retaining. And I bet my bottom dollar that most of these people weren't getting naked, stepping on the scale. They didn't fast for the full like 12 hours. Maybe they had like a little bit of a snack because they forgot to eat the extra calories the day before. Like, there's a lot of variation in this, and you have to remember that these people are human. They're not going to do things perfectly. And these measurements were not taken perfectly, especially in pilot trials like Ribeiro.
So essentially, these are just a lot of different indirect ways to look at growth. So like when we're looking at these papers as well, it's worth mentioning fat-free mass, lean body mass. Like, these things are not direct measurements of muscle growth, and these are indirect measurements of measuring muscle growth in the first place. Muscle mass, yeah. So point is, like, when we're looking at these papers, we have to consider that as a variable, right? You eat more carbs, you drink more water, your lean body mass goes up.
And on the topic of that, My thesis is going to be somewhat on steatosis, which is basically the infiltration of fat and muscle. Now, guess what else happens when you're eating excess calories? Some fat is going to be deposited in your muscle.
Yep.
So you're like, it's going to be lean muscle mass, but maybe they're just extra lipid droplets inside of your muscle.
Yep, and ultrasounds can't really detect the differences. It was actually a paper very recently. I'll see if I can find it. I'll throw it up.
Oh, like
but they actually, no, they compared ultrasounds versus MRIs and the accuracy that they had in terms of detecting muscle thickness. And it was off very significantly compared to the MRI.
Something to mention on the topic of that is specifically with, so I'm obviously not going to say exactly what my thesis is on because I'm not trying to, like, all that stuff.
Yeah.
That being said, when you're looking at like the fat deposition in muscle, you can look at MRI and the different shades that it can be. So fat mass will cause like your muscle to either be like, depending on how much fat mass you have, or fat in deposition in your muscle that you have, you're gonna have like lighter MRI signal on the actual photo, or you're gonna have darker MRI signal. And so depending on how much fat you already have inside of your muscle, there's going to be differences. And given that you are in a surplus, there could be some modification to that. And I already know that what his argument against that is going to be is that myostatosis only occurs in older adults. We don't necessarily know that eating in a calorie surplus is going to result in an increase in lipid droplets inside of your muscle. That's not something that is well established in the literature, and I could probably confirm that after this too.
Yeah, but nonetheless, point is, the overall evidence, like, we can't ignore it and just say, oh, there's limitations and we can't use any of it. But the point is, you got to be careful before making like hardcore like stances on caloric surpluses when the data is looking at mostly indirect measurements. And even like I try to be a little bit careful to say like how much of a surplus is necessary to maximize growth, because theoretically in a perfect world, like if I could be in a 20 calorie surplus, I'd rather do that, right, than being in a 100 calorie surplus, because then I could further minimize fat gain. But we just don't really know the exact amount of calories it takes to synthesize new contractile proteins. We have general estimates that we can make, but we can't like account for all the other factors, all the other metabolic activity that occurs as well. So we just have to kind of guesstimate. So that's why it's better to go off of multiple different metrics rather than going off of the scale weight like everybody else does, where it's just looking at the scale. Because if you do that, you're going to be very potentially disappointed when you gain freaking 5-10% body fat in a year, being in a 250 calorie surplus. So that's my at least overall, I guess, wrap up regarding the limitations. But do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I also just wanted to clarify, like, when I say myostatosis, I'm really meaning like normal lipid deposition inside of muscle, because that would be considered like if you're talking about like intramyocellular lipids, which are just little drops of fat inside of your muscles, inside of your muscle cells, that might be construed as lean body mass by a DEXA scan, because a DEXA scan is measuring quote unquote lean body mass, and that's based off of density, and it's not going to be as specific to be able to identify, is this lean mass larger or bigger because there's more water? Is there more intramyocellular lipids? Is there more salt? Is there more like non-contractile proteins? Like, there's a lot of variation, and lean body mass can also include specific lean like vascular tissue and things like that. And so there's a lot of things that can be misconstrued depending on what the methods were surrounding taking that measurement. So if they didn't adjust for hydration, and I think that was in one of the studies where they didn't adjust for hydration on purpose. And so like it's important to remember that there's a lot of things that go into getting these measurements too that can add to the error.
Yep. So in the end, just to kind of, I think we talked a little bit about the theoreticals already. Like you briefly brought up, like one day we're in a deficit, one day we're in a surplus. Overall, it's the net expenditure for the week that's probably going to dictate your ability to maximize growth. So like you being in a 50 calorie deficit one day, it's not going to probably decrease muscle protein synthesis rates significantly enough. And you have fat on your body to use as energy. So it's not like you can't pull that energy from your fat stores and then use that energy to synthesize new contractile proteins. So that's why you can probably theoretically, in some cases, maximize growth in a deficit. But the problem is with a deficit, we have multiple variables that influence our perception of effort, our ability to train hard, influencing our fatigue in the gym, and that prevents us from actually recruiting all the motor units that we normally would in our surplus bulking gaining phase. And that's the reason why you can't maximize growth in a deficit. It's not because we don't have the energy, it's just because there's factors in our body that are trying to prevent us from starving to death, and it affects our ability to perform. So, do you have anything else you want to add to the theoreticals or the other conversations there?
I was just gonna say, or you could be a psycho like me with my hormones in the gutter and still trying to push myself as hard as humanly possible.
As testosterone is a whole other conversation, but I'm not even going to go into that. And practically speaking, right, like let's say you're a beginner, right? I think it's okay to aim for like having weight goals if you want to give yourself some like general goals.
If you're underweight.
If you're underweight especially. But I will urge a little bit of caution, right? The whole 1 pound a month like gain goal is not going to last forever. And eventually that kind of a goal is just going to lead to you getting fat.
And it depends on your genetics.
Yeah,
too.
and it does depend on your
like,
genetics.
If you're following Lyle's, if you're following Lyle's recommendations and you're noticing that you're not gaining as much, don't be so hard on yourself because his expectations are not reality.
Also, I will say, you can have the executive decision to look at your rate of gain in terms of fat mass and go, okay, I need to stop this, because it's like, let's say you're gaining at a pound a month, and in 6 months you're noticing, I'm looking a little fluffier than usual. Don't say, oh, trust the process, right? If you're gaining significant fat, then you need to dial it back, right? Like dial it back.
And I'm just like, what I was saying was like, Lyle isn't a fortune teller. He doesn't know what the future looks like for you specifically. So following his recommendations, if that leads you into a place where you are looking fluffier, dial it back. Don't just keep following it. It's not worth it.
So have a little bit of executive function to look at yourself, month to month, compare your physique, look at your trend weights on the scale week to week, generally get an idea of what your rate of gain is or lack of, and then you can make assessments from there. And also pay attention to your training, right? How much is your training progressing or not progressing? Are you regressing on things? Things like this can also indicate ineffective programming, or can indicate fatigue, which could be coming from your training specifically, or it could be coming from your diet, right? So if you're maybe not having enough carbs, increase your carbohydrates, see what happens.
Around your training,
too. Around your training.
That's the one thing that I did want to mention. People dog on Maingaining, not necessarily because Maingaining is not effective, but because people end up putting themselves in a deficit because they're not accurately representing their maintenance calories, or because they're just not consuming carbs around their diet, around their workouts. Like usually when people go into a bulk, they start over-consuming carbs. They start over-consuming fat. Maybe it's not necessarily, like, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's the surplus that's causing people to anecdotally see more gains in a bulk. I think that it's the fact that they're just actually eating the amount of carbs they need to be consuming.
Yeah, because that's the biggest problem with the deficit, is that you're not able to replenish your glycogen fully in most cases if you're actually in a substantial deficit. Like let's say you're in a 15 to 20% deficit from your maintenance, you're probably not maximizing your glycogen storage capacity.
Which you don't have to do.
Which you don't have to do, but here's the problem. Our type 2 muscle fibers are very high explosive, powerful muscle fibers at the end of heavy resistance training. Intramuscular, like when we look at the different fiber typing, we tend to see our type 1 muscle fibers perfectly fine. We do see significant near depletion of type 2 muscle fibers, which is why, as she said, bringing your carbs closer towards your training and actually having enough carbs will help you perform better in the gym. And tension is the driver of growth, and if we can maximize tension, then we can theoretically grow under any condition, and that's the main point. But obviously, if you're in a 1,000-calorie deficit, you're probably not having that glycogen availability.
Like nobody's arguing you can maximize muscle in a severe deficit, but like a very mild deficit where you're still able to increase the amount of carbohydrates, you're allowed to eat the most amount of carbohydrates that you can, and you're still able to sufficiently train hard, then you're fine. And if you're also, eat your carbs around your training, because it's not just your muscles. I would actually argue that your CNS has...
Yeah, your blood glucose levels.
Your CNS has more of an issue with blood, like your actual ability to perform, because your nervous system does not have an ability to store glycogen. Your muscles do. Your nervous system doesn't. So you want to have blood sugar fairly high around the time that you're training, because it allows your nervous system to send better signals to your muscles.
Yeah.
Glucose is your muscle and brain's favorite source of energy, point blank, okay?
Yeah, it's as I say, like with the regards to like around the training, I will say if you are maybe not like super fasted, let's say you had a meal 2 hours before your training, like you don't really have to overdo this, but I generally would aim for like 1 gram per kilo. Like let's say your first thing in the morning, I would have at least 1 gram per kilogram of body weight and carbs about 60 to 90 minutes before training, just to make sure that you're getting, number one, your liver glycogen storage fully replenished again, because overnight it tends to deplete, and then you're also still having a little bit of excess glucose spill over into your bloodstream, so your brain can essentially pull that glucose and use for energy.
And your muscles, because the Franzo Lilly Lecture trifecta, skeletal muscle, is the #1 spot of insulin-mediated glucose uptake, which basically means that when you eat, insulin is telling sugar to go directly to your muscle.
But one thing to consider, you're not going to replenish your glycogen within just like 30, 60 minutes.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of hours. So it's just important to have an overall high carb diet, but most of your carbs should probably be around your training. Just so that way, the next time you go into your gym session, that glycogen is synthesized in your muscles. So overall, I think that covers everything. Generally, practically speaking, like we already kind of covered it. Arbitrary like weight goals are fine if you're a beginner, probably not as needed for advanced lifters. I still would say you probably don't need to see more than a pound and a half a month for like most people per month in terms of weight change. Pay attention to your composition more. Like look at your, like if you don't even see your abs, you probably shouldn't even be trying to gain. You should probably try to see fat loss. So point is, if you start like losing significant definition, then just adjust your calories, reduce the rate of gain. And it's not that I'm against the tracking weight, it's just you need to be aware of the other metrics that go into this.
It's not all about body weight.
Yeah, exactly. So in the end, most people do not disagree with us. They just tend to kind of, I guess, straw man, and I also like, I feel like they're just not consistent with their claims.
They're really not.
Because again, like this whole 200-300 calorie surplus thing is ridiculous when you look at the actual like practical recommendations that a lot of people make, because they just don't follow their own recommendations.
They're also arbitrary.
And they're arbitrary. So
nobody can tell you how much muscle you're going to gain.
So in the end, right, you're either only in a calorie surplus or a deficit. There's no real maintenance, okay? So it's all like semantics in that sense. Minimize the surplus as much as you can. Pay attention to the scale. Pay attention to your training. Pay attention to your composition. Don't get fat. Maximize your performance in the gym. Have a good program and train hard. I think that's pretty much the general gist to maximizing growth. None of these papers, sleep and carbs as well. None of these papers showed what Lyle was trying to claim. They just showed that more calories, it just doesn't. It's more body fat. So that's all I got. I guess this is hopefully going to be filmed on both of our. Are we posting it on both our channels? Is it? Can we collaborate? I think we're allowed to collaborate.
Because I don't want to post another video.
Yeah. So this will be on both of our pages. So make sure you like and subscribe both, or I guess like and subscribe, but subscribe to both of us, and then like the video in general. Yeah. Let's stop with the grumpy old men just fucking trying to demean women for.
Also, wait, I'm not the girl with the big tits like that other guy said that I am, and I'm not a chick. My name's Ella. Call me by my name. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like hella disrespectful, bro. Like you're 50 years old and you're throwing temper tantrums at people who disagree with you over something as silly as a surplus. I genuinely cannot understand the reaction here. And then saying that you're disappointed like you're her father in her video is ridiculous, bro. Like I'm not even gonna get into it. Either way, that's all I got, bro. Yes, he said he was not, no, he said the word that he was, what was it? That he was just not impressed. Who said we were trying to impress you, bro?
I don't care about you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But yeah, insert those 2 clips. I'll send them.
We live in a crazy world, so it's always nice to see that there's still some consistency. Nobody in this industry is able to admit when they're wrong and simply say, Lyle, you're right. I'm of course referring to Scientific Snitch's attempt to rebut my video on the whole gaining muscle without a calorie surplus thing. It's really nice to see that some of the gender differences are going away.
Usually it's only the insecure baby boys in this industry that can't admit that I'm right. Good to see that the chicks are stepping up too.
Holy response. Speaking of insecure baby boys, isn't this you? You talk about people in the industry not being able to admit when they're wrong, but this is your mentality about everything. And just a friendly reminder, you claimed that she only used one cherry-picked paper to back her claims. Her video rebuttal was showing you that she didn't. But yeah, instead of acknowledging that, you double down and then try to devalue her by calling her just a chick of the industry, when she's somebody who is actually pursuing an education in this. You're just trying to make her sound dumb. You're trying to put her down to make yourself feel better, because in the end, you are the insecure little ego baby boy that you're making fun of. Like and subscribe. Like if I mog. Well, I don't mog, bro. Right now I'm fat.